for Africa Open Data. I appreciate all of your time and your focus and commitment as we try to pull people in from the break. So we'll have a few more people be joining us. So today we're going to start off by really looking at a few cases of what's been going on, how communities are connecting, how people are using open data for agriculture and nutrition in Africa around African open data. And as part of that, what we wanted to do was to realize that the people who create and use Africa Open Data and the community behind it is really the core of making all of this happen. It's an important ecosystem. And so I'd like each of you to recognize and stand up. Go ahead, stand up. Stand up. All of us. So you are the community behind Africa Open Data. Whether you live in Africa, work in Africa, are interested or work on behalf of people in Africa, you are the community. And so I'd like to start off with acknowledging all of your contributions and giving you a round of applause. So to just kick this off, I just want to take 30 seconds and have you turn to the person next to you and start to meet and greet people in this community. So just introduce yourself and what brought you to this conference. Session and has been fundamental with myself in creating a set of activities around Africa Open Data, and we've held a set of conferences that I'll talk briefly about. I am here today actually representing United Earth, which is a nonprofit I have with the Nobel family that uses music to raise awareness around education for refugees and food security in Uganda and in Los Angeles and other African nations as well. And so I think it's important for all of us to think about the perspective we're bringing. All of us bring different kinds of ideas to what open data means and how to affect impact out of that. And so things as widely diverse as, the One Campaign, music, technologies are the kinds of stories that you'll hear today, and I think are important for each of us as we start to think about that impact. So just to ground us really quickly, open data, again, is that data which can be freely used, modified, and shared by anyone and everyone. And this becomes really important in working throughout Africa, particularly where we want to make sure that the data coming out of governments is clear and accurate. Maybe it's not always complete because there might be gaps in it sometimes, but part of it is trying to validate that. And we work with data journalists like Winnie Kamu and others to help to bring transparency and accountability onto the government data that's being released, and to really understand that people all over the world are using data. So when we look at it, it's data journalists, it's developers, there's a hackathon going on over the next 2 days, which is awesome, and so developers are going to be using this open data right here, right now, about food and agriculture, researchers, customers, businesses, most importantly. So even businesses that are working, so I was working in Sierra Leone last year, and we were working with local businesses that are just doing like food delivery, so getting fresh food to people. And part of the open data they needed was addressing schemes. So sometimes it seems like the simplest data is data that people really need. And as we've heard this morning, there's this issue around trying to make all of that open data and all of our disparate efforts part of an integrated ecosystem that gets focused in a way often through the Sustainable Development Goals. So all of you probably know well about those, but just to remind you, these are a set of 17 global goals from the United Nations that countries have signed up for around ending hunger, ending poverty, gender equity, climate change, and trying to measure through 169 indicators how countries are actually getting to that. So let me just talk about some of the work I've been doing in Africa the last few years, partly with the World Bank and others. And I'm just going to tell a story. It's slightly fictional, but it's all real in the essence of it. And this is around Goal 6, which is water. So part of it is making sure that we have the availability and sustainable management of water for all. So I'm going to tell a little story about a friend of mine named Nampira who lives outside of Kampala, and she's a farmer. And so Nampira, like 82% of other people in rural Africa, has a cell phone. And so she has access to some kinds of technology, but she has moderate literacy. She's not a data scientist. She's not really particularly involved in open data, but she has needs that are driven by making better decisions with scarce resources every day. So part of what she's looking at is how she and her family can benefit from better crop prices at market and better crop viability. And so she can actually work with intermediaries like M-Farm. So M-Farm is a company that uses open data for crop prices at local markets, road safety, and other things to be able to get, through text messaging, information to farmers who can subscribe to information about where the best price is for cassava today, or what I need to do to treat a sick cow. So she's not a data scientist, but she uses open data. She's also trying to figure out the best place to drill a new well on her property. So there's drought issues going on throughout different parts of Africa. And so part of that is understanding that there are satellite imagery data from NASA and other organizations that can do subterranean mapping of water. So actually, working with that data, we know where the best place is to drill wells. But Nampira doesn't have access to that data. But instead, she can work with intermediaries like Water for Life that uses that satellite imagery data to figure out the best place to put water points and help farmers be able to create those new wells. And so again, the idea isn't that the opening of data in and of itself creates the social good, but all of us in this community that just met each other, acting together can make everybody have more powerful decisions. And so the idea is that through this, we can help create the actual beneficiaries for people looking to get access to water, to get access to agriculture. Now, recently there was banana blight in Uganda as well, and Nampira was one of the had a problem with this. And banana is the most stable crop, so it's really important that you get your banana crop in. And so the government wasn't sure how to get the pesticides out. Very, very rural area, lots of road and transportation issues. And so the idea was to get farmers to, over radio, describe what the problem was, and they get farmers to snap a picture of their crop if they had this blight on it. And then through machine learning, we could look at those images and be able to analyze them in a way that could identify where the blight was and be able to go out and send people in the field to those specific locations. So farmers independently became data scientists. They collected data, they gathered it, they put it and submitted it in formal ways that later led to actual impacts and benefits to themselves. So this kind of virtuous cycle that all of us are starting to build together is really where the idea of connecting across a continent puts people in control. And then Nampira, I was expecting to go, when I went to market with her, I was expecting to see stacks of shillings. And in fact, all I saw was mobile money. So people were just exchanging this. And it was safer for her, as a woman particularly, to be able to keep track of that money. Because at the end of the day, her hope was that not only was she going to be able to feed her family, but that she'd eventually be able to send her daughter to school. And so the kinds of things we do, although they may seem esoteric at times, although it may seem that it's hard to get connected, each of these is an important building block into how we're making sure that we're actually affecting lives in Africa and making them better by giving people better information. So this last year, we decided to, Kat and I decided, and a lot of other people, to actually build this community and sort of make it physical. So in addition to having online resources, we held a conference last year in Dar es Salaam, and we had 450 open data advocates from across Africa show up. We were a little bit surprised. Just because it was such great connections. And we worked with Code for Africa, and D-Lab, and the World Bank, and the government of Tanzania, and a whole variety of people who together, School of Data, and Open Data Institute, who together brought the necessary aspects to get that community going. GODAN was an amazing partner in that summit as well. And so after that, we decided to hold regional conferences. So since then, we've held them in Sierra Leone and Freetown, where we had a festival, Open Data Festival, which was amazing with the government. About 250 people showed up. We held it in South Africa, looking at businesses and policies. We held one just a month ago in Kenya as well, in Nairobi, and really focused on capacity building. And each of these, we've been able to give training and support in open data to journalists, researchers, students, young people across the continent, and really starting to sort of connect that together. If you want to be part of that effort, it's great. It's an ongoing group. We have a meetup group that meets every month, and AfricaOpenData.net is where all of the resources are for the conference. So this community that we started today is really extending a community that is already vibrant and growing. Here's our group from Dar and our group from Nairobi, and many of our partners that we are working together. So I just welcome you all today, and we'll talk to some of our other speakers about the kind of work that's going on to make sure that each and every day we think about how we release and use data to empower people to make better decisions. Thank you.
Hello everyone, morning. My name is Tomiwa Adeshina. I work in a company called Sahara Group, based in Nigeria, Lagos, Nigeria. Sahara is an oil and gas company, but we're focused on doing good corporate social responsibility. And I'm here to share with you one of our projects, which we're doing in Nigeria, in partnership with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals Fund. This is part of a drive to push partnerships to achieve the SDGs, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa, and also spread it to other parts of the world. So the Food Africa Project, what is the initiative I'm here to talk about? It's a partnership, as I said, between the United Nations, Sahara Group, Kaduna State Government, which is one of the states in Nigeria where the project has been implemented, and the Roca Brothers, who currently own one of the best restaurants in the world in Spain. And what we're trying to achieve here is to use international and global partnerships to solve local problems which we have identified. And these problems are not just peculiar to farmers in Kaduna, but are peculiar to farmers across Nigeria and Africa and the developing world. So what is this project about? What we're trying to do with the United Nations is to set up what we have called a processing center, a food collection and processing center, which is aimed at teaching local farmers who have predominantly practiced subsistence farming for generations and basically just grow food products to feed themselves, feed their families, and make probably a few dollars monthly until they have lived cycles of poverty. And all these people know how to do is farm. And actually they know how to farm well. But the main issue is they have been using poor techniques, archaic techniques, and haven't got the chance to learn how to do things the right way. So this partnership with the SDG Fund aims at empowering these farmers, alleviating poverty and ultimately eradicating poverty, promoting social inclusion, because most of these places, as we have seen, women are marginalized, and you find out that more often than not, women are even more hardworking than men in these locations. And so it's to promote social inclusion, to promote avenues for women to be involved, people living with disabilities to be involved, and ultimately to empower young people. And so the plan is to, what we have started to do already, is to build what we have called a food collection and processing center, where we have a one-on-one interaction with the farmers, and then the farmers typically will have grown their products, try to take them to local markets, which happen probably once every 4 days. And so due to poor storage techniques, some of this, like half of the products get spoiled. Poor transportation techniques, they lose some of their products while transporting them to the farms or to the markets. And then when they get to the markets, they're only able to sell a portion of the products. But then this project aims to address all these issues by, first of all, providing the farmers with the right kind of seedlings that they can use to grow internationally acceptable standards, grow them products, and then also train them on how to farm properly. And so it's been a lot of work because trying to change their mindsets. These are things that they have been doing for generations, but we have started to get to where we want to get to. We teach them to grow the products, they bring the products to the processing center, we pay them cash for the products, and then we process the products and then export them through our partnerships with the Roca brothers, or also sell to other places. So what this has done.
I've seen that also myself in Uganda. Did a project for PEPFAR, and CDC is working on using biometrics to do unique identifiers because there's no easy way that they've figured out so far to really tie into the data systems of the ministry. And the ministry actually has really good data compared to most companies, but it's just a common problem in other places.
I think the interest is the key.
That's a
that, you know, if you do want any kind of manipulation, not restricted to there is yes, manipulation of the data during the voting process. And if you do have first registration, that makes it far more difficult. Now you've got a big issue about your gauging of voting population. It's very, very interesting about where politicians' interests are on how you're gathering public data.
What's interesting in terms of what works, and to speak to that, one of the things that I found, again, in Uganda in global health, what I found is that global health has the best data. PEPFAR has the best data within global health. And then ag is actually second to global health. It's a gross generalization. And then it sort of just goes precipitously down from there. But a lot of that's because PEPFAR put in a hell of a lot of money into capturing data. And global health has put in, and they've got a culture of data. But there isn't the same culture of data in certainly others. Agriculture also, I think, it also has a culture of data, but again, it sort of drops off quite precipitously when you start getting into education, getting into all the other development sectors, it drops around. And so a lot of that is that culture, that training, doing public health, learning about statistics. So there's kind of that element as well. And then the money discussion also is, PEPFAR won't give you your money if you're not showing numbers.
Information on nobody's covering that. And then once we move forward, the rest of those data is not just there. And you start looking at them over time, you wonder, wow, you're increasing all of them negative. What caused that? There's no correlation in that in terms of sign or anything. That's when you realize you can just get it. But is harmonized so that the kind of indices they use to collect the data is the same, so that they can receive actual proper data, and then be able to use that to so that's what we're doing. There's like 3 different things. So there's the proper action piece of it, there's the biodiversity, and then there's how do you monitor natural resources in the public domain, most of which is around air and water quality.
Right.
And if there's no, how do I say this, corollary right now to in the US, we have Air and Water Act, in the UK, and European Union, they have the Water Quality Directive. In developing countries, they don't necessarily have the same types of legislation, so there's no incentive to actually sort of tragedy of the comments that academic people in the 1950s sort of so there's and the food security context, back to what this gentleman said before about if they don't know what questions to be asking the public policymakers, then will they underestimate what food security actually means in the context of community services.
Okay, I also like to jump in here.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
So I live in Nigeria and I work in Nigeria.
Oh, yeah.
And luckily for me, because of where I work, we have operations across African countries and also in the Middle East. But what we've decided to do in Nigeria now is that there's been an awareness that there's an increasing divide between the private and the public sector. And so the private sector has good data. Particularly when you have the fast consumer goods industry, like Coca-Cola, toothpaste, and whatnot, who need to know the number of people that live in the region, the demographics and whatnot. So they will spend their money to get good data because it will help the market. But then also in the private sector, so private healthcare is a lot better than public healthcare. So you go to a private hospital and they have the basic computer systems that has everyone. So I can go to a hospital, I can go to my hospital in Lagos and say, oh, they can pull up my name and see how many times I've been to the hospital, my family history and whatnot. But then you go to a public hospital and what they do is they use traditional methods. So they have paper and files and then the right stuff. So when you come back 5 years after, for them to be able to locate the file that you had used 5 years ago, it's a lot of trouble. And then because there's a lot of paperwork, it's cumbersome, and then health challenges because it accumulates dust and dirt. And then when there's a fire, it goes up in flames. So what we have started to do is that we had a summit with the government a few weeks ago, where we started to say that the private sector has the strength and the money. The public sector has the technical know-how and the information. So how can we marry the two? How can the private sector support the public sector to ensure that the public hospital has just a basic computer system where they can increase all this information and all the information. So the project we're working with the public sector, for instance, we have done a lot of information from the local farmers. But when we didn't have access to local farmers, it was the state government that gave us access to local farmers based on their techniques and whatnot. So what we're trying to do right now is to see how we can strengthen the public sector to ensure that everything works efficiently, because there's a huge disparity in access between the private and the public sector.
And we're talking about and what I find really interesting about this is we're not talking about the overall sort of GMs, we're talking about the local private sector. Because I've seen that, I've seen that in other places too. The data that you have is actually quite rich in a lot of private sector that's over designed and it doesn't necessarily cross over.
There has to do with the complete lack, but there's a lack of focus on building and processing data. Not so much in Nigeria, because it's a huge base. There's so much more offices. So every been in Kenya and Tanzania and Nigeria, Mozambique, all these countries, Ghana and Africa. Foundation, and you're actually served from Kenya, we've got no word except for leadership. So that's what he says. There's one thing that's missing in this equation is he said the right thing, but he's actually doing the right thing. So they're saying the right thing. So one thing he said was, he's not employment as the creation of jobs. And then he talked about each process. So he put stuff together that this is a little more than just making farming smarter through open data. This is about and creating a foundation for the economies of these countries so that young people have a place to work. Because it goes back to what you were saying before. So in order to attract more of the quote-unquote private sector or develop SMEs across the those countries, we have to have a different mindset.
And there's also a weakness in the link between research and industry. That's not working. We have all the technologies, but the industry or the private sector is not linking the so that they can take up this technology and start commercializing. For example, in Kenya, tourism is a big thing, a big industry. We have all these good wild fruits like blueberries. Here in America, you get a blackberry or blueberry cobbler and stuff like that. Where is the blueberry cobbler or whatever in Kenya that can be processed and used by the tourist industry? And that's a great job for the youth. Because these are foods that are very nutritious, the nutrition comes in. So when are we going to start seeing the role of researchers and academia in terms of
It's the young people that want to start these little companies. I was there last week. So they need
They
encouragement.
need the information, the technology, and
They need
have
funding.
it.
So
But
I'm-
there's no link.
What I'm hearing is a couple different things very quickly, that we've got, we've got a lack of good processing, lack of leadership by government, but also that lack of linkages between the research academia and the entrepreneurial community, especially young people. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to mention that while sometimes the private sector that has the better data, the government doesn't, donors do something quite significant.
Okay.
So when donors come in and start a project, often because they don't trust the national data,
Yes.
they'll go and do their own basic research
Yes.
and create their own data. And when the project is over, those data are lost completely.
Yep.
There's no way to capture them. So you can put it more
And what's interesting actually about PEPFAR is that PEPFAR has a policy called the 3 1s, where they're not supposed to be creating their own data sets. It's actually part of the global OGAC strategy that you strengthen ministries' data systems. Now, there is a mismatch there. There's some clear intentions, but it's actually working. At least in Uganda, just came back from evaluation. Actually, is working to strengthen the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Gender's own monitoring and evaluation system. And the thing that's interesting is that oftentimes you have a lot of capacity in these countries where you've got individuals who do have training, but there's only one of them. And they're supposed to be managing a countrywide program, and so they don't have the additional support. So that's also another thing that donors can help with is, okay, we're going to bring in additional support and help. But I think that point about donors not having their own data sets and their own data collection systems, but rather helping strengthen what's called, the ministries or the NGO sectors. Well, so PEPFAR, what they do is basically say to the government, you will provide your data to us, or you don't get our money. And PEPFAR can do that because they're big, and they don't have a problem with that. And that data is, of course, about what's mandate. So the donors actually have a lot of power. But in fact, the other point too I want to make about the donors is that it's usually not even the donor doesn't actually go and do anything on the ground. Usually, USAID. It's almost always, for example, they hired a funding partner, a contractor, or an NGO. And so the NGO is the one who's going out and actually collecting the data. Now, the Obama administration now requires open data first, as by default. You now have to publish all your data to the development data library. However, going from policy to implementation is obviously a long road. And then, part of it is actually getting all of the different players, the different levels to understand why it's important to do that. But most of it doesn't include actually strengthening the ministry's own M&E systems. It's usually just, okay, I've got my data set, and I want to share it with you so that somebody else can come along and use it down the road. But that's, who uses it? Anyway, so who have you not heard from? Do you have anything you want to add? Oh yeah, no, that's fine.
Capacity building is thinking holistically, not just open data, free and open software, open standards, open education resources. Because if you have just one thing, if you have basic open data, but if you don't have the tools to work with the data, and especially if you have to pay a huge amount for proprietary systems, it's not possible. The next month we are actually going to Nairobi for this capacity development. We are doing it for fully free and open source software because we are keen that we just not go there and just
On data collection, data utilization.
So I don't really want to interrupt, but I'm going to. So we're coming towards the end of our time, which does not mean it has to be the end of our group discussions. But I do want to take a moment, because I know some people have other time commitments today, to just ask each group to ask somebody to step up. There's a microphone here, because we're recording this, to be able to talk about a commitment or an important thing that came up in your group. So if I can get the group in the front. Kat, do you guys want to go first? So let me start over here, because this group actually was just blessed with serendipity.
Our group was, like you said, blessed with serendipity because we had all the ministers from Sierra Leone at our table. So thanks to the Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Communications, a consultant from World Bank, 3 experts on data, and a couple of folks like myself from UNDP, it seems like we have an opportunity to actually build a collaboration for a network interested in helping the farmers in Sierra Leone collect data and use that data to think about how to market products better for the farmers there, how to develop greater expansion of some other services that would be necessary for the folks in Sierra Leone. We also have some interest from the World Bank in helping facilitate this. So our next steps will be to do a follow-up call and network and talk about what some of the obstacles might be. Also use some of the research that our colleagues here from France have offered from their work in other countries like Egypt. So it's really exciting. Thanks.
Okay, do we have another group ready to volunteer to talk? I will volunteer a group. So, Winnie, do we have somebody here who can speak?
Oh boy. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good afternoon. It's morning where I'm from still. All right, so I'll just give a quick summary. We didn't quite get to the commitments level yet, but we did have a quite good discussion, initially starting around digitization of agricultural records in Nigeria, specifically Cross River State. Then the discussion really got to the challenges around youth participation in agriculture, specifically around looking at some of the barriers that persons are talking about that prevent youth from getting into the agriculture space, around land access and ownership, the distinction between a lot of challenges in some of the agricultural contexts in Africa. Lands are owned by the government or at the community level, but youth don't necessarily have access to good lands. Also, the challenges around access to, if we are wanting to engage youth, also providing the methods for agriculture should be modern. So making that a part of whatever capacity building is done around youth. And then most importantly, communicating to them through channels that they're already accessing and utilizing information. So there was an example of a project where they're looking at case studies and publishing those things online, using YouTube and that type of information as a way of making agriculture more interesting and accessible to young people. And the need for those strong examples in the agricultural space of success and using those channels. That was a big part of what we were discussing. I don't know if there's anything else I missed. Yeah, social media, I talked about that. And leasing land as an option. In particular, actually, there's a point that someone made about I think it was in Nigeria, where they were mapping the resources and who controlled those resources, and found that youth were very disadvantaged groups. So looking at how do we map out that information, but then also how are youth targeted as part of the resource distribution process. Thank you to try to engage.
So our group in the back, do we have something to share? Wow, okay, this group makes number 1 for number of Post-it notes generated. Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
So I'm not going to read all these Post-it notes because we'd be here all day. So I just made a quick summary of all of this, and I'm actually hoping to write it up in a little bit more detail. But I think, and I want the rest of my group to please jump in and say, wait, you forgot about X, because I did this in 2 seconds. Some of the key things that worked, didn't work, and then partners. This is sort of a summary of all that. First of all, the history of the data is incredibly valuable. And there's a lot of data out there, we just don't know where it is or how to use it. And so there was a lot of talk about the private sector has really good data, there's satellite data, there is actually existing a tremendous amount of data. However, a lot of the challenges that we found and one of the solutions and projects that worked were creating a culture of data-driven decision making in ministries, by local farmers, and sort of understanding some of the complexities we're talking about. And that leads to dialogue, it leads to coordination across different groups, but it also really keeps the focus back on what are we doing, which is improving the systems, the agricultural systems, the ability for farmers to make better decisions. We're not doing data for data's purpose. We also talked about how we need to make sure that we understand who the data is for, especially the farmers, that there's a lot of data overload from farmers. The farmers need to benefit from the data that's being collected and captured. And really to do that, the data has to be local and targeted and appropriate. So we talked about how everyone's talking about, oh, we've got SMS and we've got mobile phones, but radio is incredibly powerful. And having things at a local level really helps you with quality, and it really helps you with that targeting and usage. We talked also about how one of the keys, and especially partnerships, is political will. Having governments lead and really want to have this. The donors can play a tremendous role, especially when they're collecting their own data sets, to provide standards, and having civil society continue to put pressure. And also the role of the private sector, since the private sector often just creates its own data in silos because it can't rely on the government. So kind of working to build that political will and that partnership between all these different people can actually improve data across the board. And finally, in no particular order, we talked about how a lot of this is cross-sectoral. So you've got, really to understand food security, for example, you have to understand demographics and health. To understand food processing, you have to understand transportation, you have to understand education. So we have to break the silos between ministries and between different sectors. There needs to be more linkages across all these different sectors so that there's one good set of quality data that can be used by the different audiences for these targeted purposes. So what did I forget? Anything? Awesome.
So is this one mega group up here? One mega group. And so who is going to share?
Okay, so our group, we had a lot of nice, good discussions going on in terms of what's needed in open access. So we determined that there's a need for a classification systems to be able to understand what data has already been collected so that public can actually access it and go through it. There's a need to have training and education for researchers, health professionals, and at the local level and grassroots level so that the public can actually understand how to collect the data and categorize it and understand how important it is for them to actually have the data accessible. There's a need for having a bottom-up processing system so that people who want to be able to have access to data have the means to do that, and to have also a top-bottom approach where governments and political systems are willing to actually be able to help people at the grassroots level get access to that kind of data. So all of these needs put together, I believe that there's a commitment to have organizations who can provide that training. There's a commitment to need the funding to actually develop those programs, and there's a need to have a commitment for someone to develop a categorization system. I'm trying to read these post-it notes. So, here's one. So, push GODAN. Oh, I forgot to have a forum. So, I think the main thing that would be quite beneficial is to have a forum. If GODAN could help put together a forum where we have one section of people or organizations who can provide that kind of service, and another section where people who need those kinds of services can meet and have dialogue and actually come and conclude on some partnerships going on that front. So that would be ideal and really helpful for people in representing the African nations and people on the other side who are wanting to provide that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. These are amazing ideas, commitments. We actually have a project being built on one team. We have the King and Queens of Post-it notes in the back. We have amazing ideas and dialogues at all the tables. So Kat and Winnie and I are going to put these all together as an open data set. So please, we need to collect your Post-it notes. Keep them together in your groupings, but or however you want to organize them, but make sure that either Winnie or Kat or I have those notes. And then please go to Africa Open Data Net. We'll be posting on our meetup site there. We have monthly calls. There's lots of ways for us to stay in touch. And if you want to, and we're also be developing a WhatsApp group. We have one in Sierra Leone already. We're going to be developing one for East Africa as well, and for other areas that you might be interested in. Please fill out the evaluation forms. We tried some different things with this session, interactive as well as presentations. We'd love to get your feedback. And just, I am very grateful to all of you for the work you're doing, for the interest you have, and for your commitment today. So go forth, open up agriculture data, learn for the rest of the conference, and thank you very much.